CNT125. We're continuing our Chapter 11. We're on the section on AAA, Authentication, Authorization, and Accounting. Controlling access to a network and its resources is called Network Access Control. We also will see names like Identity and Access Management. Hopefully you remember that from our Amazon Web Services lab that we did earlier this semester, where we actually did some accounts and permissions, and then we even tested those. So think of those kind of things as we're working through this right here. The three main areas, authentication, authorization, accounting. So let's take a look. AAA, pronounced abbreviated AAA, pronounced AAA, three components required to manage access control. So the first one, authentication, is the process of like identifying who are you? Are you an employee? Are you a visitor? Who are you to know what we're going to do with you and your traffic, if you will. The second one, authorization. Okay, now that we identify that you are an employee, what are you allowed to do? Well, Doug Brown as an employee is allowed access to this part of the data on the servers, if you will. Meanwhile, somebody that works in payroll would have access to these areas of the data on the network. So, you know, once we know who you are, what are you allowed to do? Somebody that's a visitor, just a visitor, let's say a visitor in a waiting room at a hospital, we are going to give you a pathway to the internet, and that's pretty much it. You're not going to touch anything else. So these are kind of things like, okay, once we know who you are, what are you allowed to do? That's the authorization part. And the last part is, what did you do? The accounting. While you were here, what did you do? We're going to keep record of that. If it was just ordinary, you know, everyday work traffic, awesome. But if you're trying to get access to parts of the network you shouldn't, okay, why are you doing that? And if you did manage to get access to them, what did you do? Were you accidentally given permissions to that, or were you trying to circumvent something to get access to it? So the accounting part is logging what did you actually do. Okay, so with that in mind then, coming back here real quickly, we're going to start in on authentication and then eventually authorization and eventually accounting. All right, so let's take a look here. Authentication. User can be authenticated to a local device or the network. Local authentication would be when I'm signing on to just maybe my Windows laptop at home. I would have a name and a password. I plug in Doug Brown, password, okay? And that is just a local access to that machine. And you could set it up that maybe 3 people use that machine, so you'd have a Doug Brown and a Sally Brown and a Jeff Brown or whatever that have access to that machine, and it would at least keep their information separate from each other at least some level. The other type of authentication is network authentication. So now we're thinking, all right, I'm an employee in a company signing onto the computer and getting access to data on servers in the company. So now my account information is going to be verified or double checked on something like Active Directory, a Windows server that's going to verify you are Doug Brown, here is your password, yes, you're allowed onto the network. Well, local authentication, all of our usernames, passwords are stored locally on that PC, so it's kind of low security, it's a little bit. Convenience is going to vary, and it is kind of reliable failover in case we have a network connection issue. We would at least allow that user locally onto that machine. So some pros and cons. Yeah, it is low security. There is very little security on that, and many times a hacker could brute force or circumvent that to get access to that machine. Even as simple as booting up a USB drive and using some other OS and getting access to the hard drive on there and getting data off. So it's not very secure at all, but it is one piece of a bigger puzzle. The convenience is going to vary. So I might only have access to the files on that computer. I might be able to access a pathway to drives on a server, but in many cases it's usually just kind of a local thing. It does provide a little bit of failover in case we do have a network or server failure. The person could log on locally to the laptop and at least work on there to maybe generate the report or whatever they're going to do, that when they have the connection restored, they'd be able to submit that or whatever. So it gives a little bit of a failover for that. If I have a series of computers in the company, I could do some group policy on them that'll give them certain levels of rights, but also block certain things that they would not be able to change. And that could be applied to the computer or to the user. And that would be this kind of thing here, group policy editor, that you would be using to adjust those permissions. So with local authentication, every computer is then going to have to deal with security. So there would need to be some sort of account and some sort of permissions on every computer. If I'm just dealing with a couple of computers, not a big deal. But as that grows to a dozen, 2 dozen, that's a lot of changes to make. If I'm making a change to what people have access to, I need to do it to 2 dozen computers. That's when you might want to move to a Windows domain where I actually have a server helping to maintain this for me. I can move from local authentication to network authentication by doing this kind of thing here. If I'm set for workgroup, this is local, if you will, peer-to-peer type network. If I change it to domain, I'm now saying I'm going to use something like a Windows server to authenticate and basically have my permissions taken care of through the account on the server. So network authentication now, we have some control over who is allowed to log in and what they're allowed to have access to. And here's a whole bunch of different authentication restrictions that can be done. So let's take a peek at those. Time of day. It can be limiting. You can limit when this individual, this user, if you will, has access or can log onto the network. If they try to log in on a Saturday, Sunday at 2 a.m., if you will. I love using an example because most people are not up on Sunday at 2 a.m. If I try to log in at Sunday at 2 a.m., the server will be like, no, you have no business being here. We're not going to let you log in. And this can be done on the server by indicating hours that they're allowed to log on. Total time logged on. You can limit how long somebody's logged on. Well, if somebody is a shift worker, where they work a certain shift, allowing them to be logged on for 12, 13, 14, 15 hours, that's a lot longer than their shift. So you can actually reduce that to say, no, when their shift is over, they should be logged out. And again, this is all the name of safety or security that somebody else is not going to use their connection that's already set up. Source address, where are they connecting from? If we're not allowing any remote work, then we shouldn't be allowing connection from different addresses. It should be the subnet or the network that we're using. Or it could just be the subnet for the certain branch of the company. Maybe we're setting this subnet as this branch of the company, this office of the company, and we're allowing that subnet of traffic in, but nothing else. Unsuccessful login attempts. If they try logging in too many times, it locks them out. We're all very much familiar with that. We've all probably had that happen to us at some point or another. So that's trying to prevent the hacker from logging in. On the server, you can actually set the account lockout for how many times they've failed to log in. That can actually be sent on the account. Geographic location or geofencing. They have to be in a certain area to have access to. Again, that can be set for reasons of, again, we said before, we don't want to have this remote connection in from somewhere outside of the area. We can indicate it's only in this certain area they're allowed to have access to. Okay. This leads us into some password things. Having our users set secure passwords, if you were. So as we start looking through these, if I think this is the picture they have in the book for you of Amazon Web Services, the password policy settings. These are some settings that can be done in your Amazon Web Services for passwords. If I look on a Windows server, if you will, in here are different settings that can be plugged in for passwords. Here's your password policy, account logout, and so forth that we see over here. But here's the password policy of a minimum characters. How long can it be? How long can it be before it needs to be changed out, etc. And I remind you of this because if we have very basic password settings, these types of things can happen. Now, this list is a couple years old, but you get the idea when I look at, I got this from Wikipedia, most common passwords used, they kept track of these by year. So even if I look at a couple years ago, these are the top passwords that get used because, hey, a minimum of 6 characters, minimum 9 characters, okay? This is what people are going to do if they're allowed. Now, we have to walk a fine line, though. If we make it too secure, people will want to write it down. And now we're back to square one. It is there that people can read and use. Here's another list that's out here. This is top 20 most common passwords and the count of password times that are known of. Again, if I look at the top couple up here, 3 million people using 1256. 1.5 million using 1, 2, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so these are things that'll get done if we don't try to have some kind of reasonable middle ground of password requirements. So, tips for making and keeping passwords secure. I think I rolled down through these here. Yeah, change default passwords. Yeah, never use any of the default passwords, especially on things like routers and switches and hardware that you're including. Change those and use your password policy guidelines to do this. Avoid personal information. Don't put down pet names, street addresses, those kind of things. Don't make sure those are not part of it. Avoid using real words. If I use a real word like, we'll say, Apple or something like that. Well, that could be subject to what's called a dictionary attack. Your hackers can load an entire dictionary in and say, let's start going down through all the commonly used words from the dictionary and try those as our first attempt. So making sure people aren't using a legit real word. A rainbow table attack is a little more challenging, or technically challenging to do. However, challenging involves matching known passwords with hashes in a database of hash passwords to identify as many passwords as possible. So again, people are trying to find the commonly used ones and see if that can be used to circumvent. Brute force attacking can also be done. Start common password like password. All those listed top 20 passwords. Password 1256, 125678, 12567889, QWERTY. Try all those first, and then start adding in combinations of like the common substitutions that people do. Ampersand for A kind of thing. Your long passwords and two-factor authentication are the defense against that. Again, reminding people we can't be using sticky notes to keep track of passwords. Again, we have to be careful. If we try to make it too complex, this is what people will do immediately. Side story, once upon a time, one of the churches we were at, the financial person for the church, their computer they used, the password for it was on a sticky note under the keyboard. So we had to nicely kind of educate them and like, hey, this is not really secure. We can't be doing this. But again, if you give people very, very rigid guidelines on passwords, that's the kind of thing that's going to happen. So we have to find that middle ground for this. Updating passwords and communicating with people how often or how regularly they need to be or are going to be updated. Again, this is settings that can be done in your server account. Don't reuse passwords and keep track of the last ones. Again, this is a setting that can be done in your server accounts. Using a password manager. This is becoming more common. People using a password manager, you need one password to access a whole secure database, if you will, of the passwords that you would use. And then last but not least in here, I think this one last is long is strong. A longer password is a lot more strong. And this is, I just borrowed this from a website that showed you roughly if I start increasing the number of characters and then uppercase, lowercase, how long it would take to brute force attack that today. This might change, it might become 100 years with another operating system down the road, but and that's why they have these requirements. Right here, this will show you Active Directory again, what requirements we can set for passwords. Increasing the complexity, as we just saw, helps with that as well. And in here, adding your symbols and characters and so forth, which again, most of us are used to or used to dealing with these kind of things right here. All right. When we come back, we will continue on with a little bit on passwords and hashing.